Hello and welcome back to my channel, Bookish Lady Night, as we get a look behind the book. Today I am joined by the lovely Emily Schneider. She is the author of The Love Chase and Mistletoe Bluff and um, the series Ash and Smoke. And my favorite book, which I have now because I just ordered them from her site, is The Heart Shot. Great book. If you haven't read it, definitely do so. But I'm super excited because now I have some new books for my October TBRs that I haven't read yet. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So your other series is fantasy, right?
Yes, it is.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to check that out. I love fantasy books.
Yeah,
I Those are my normal bread and butter, but I've been slowly getting over into the contemporary romance and I really loved it. So,
yeah. Fantasy was that was my first trilogy that I wrote, and I've always liked when I read fantasy between books. I like to read a rom com or like a contemporary romance just as like a palate cleanser, because
mhm,
sometimes fantasy can be really heavy, and
yeah.
so I decided, well, if it works for reading, why not writing? So I gave it a shot at rom-coms and it was so much fun. It's something totally different than fantasy.
Do you think you'll go back and do more fantasy, or are you kind of gonna stick with rom-coms?
I'm currently drafting my next fantasy book. I kind of plan to go back and forth. I'm not sure if this next fantasy book will be like a standalone or a duology or a trilogy. I haven't decided yet, but
Mhm.
probably after that, I'll do another rom-com because I have one that's like half written. So
Hmm.
probably go
Ooh, I'm
back and forth.
excited. I'm excited. So, when you are coming up with your ideas, do you do like a brain dump and like write it all down, or does it just kind of come to you as you're going?
Most of the time, it comes to me as I'm going. With the heart shot, I someone actually sent me a reel of a stranger photo shoot, and I was like, "This would be the coolest book idea!" Like, and I sat down that day and wrote the chapter of the photo shoot, and I was like, "This is gonna be an epic book." And then I just wrote it all, and I was like, "Well, I can't stop here because there's more characters that I need to
Yeah,
write." So
I love that. I loved, I made a reel of that book when I did the review for that book. I don't know if it tagged you. I'll have to send it to you, but I like when I read that first part, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. This is phenomenal. This is so cute and so great. And like then you like made this whole story around this like photo shoot and the ending. I'm not giving anything away, but the ending I was like
yeah,
so I loved it. It was such a cute, sweet story.
I'm so
And
glad to hear that.
yeah, it's like it's one of my favorites for sure. I recommend it to people when they're like, I want some cute uh cozy, sweet vibed book. I'm like, oh, I got one for you. You have to read this. So I love recommending it.
Good.
Um, so do you have a writing kryptonite?
That's a good question. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
So there's nothing that derails you when you're writing and you're like, oh, well, that went out the window for today.
I mean, other than my new baby,
Yeah.
that's kind of my kryptonite at the moment because I just sit down to write and then she wakes up from a nap or
Oh,
she starts fussing and it's like, nope, not happening today.
not happening
But
today.
before baby, it was mostly social media. Like I would write for like 5 minutes and then I'd be like, well, let's see if I have any notifications or any messages. And so I usually have to put my phone on like airplane mode or something if I'm gonna get serious about writing, just so I'm not tempted to check anything.
Yeah. You're like, I'm just gonna put that over there.
Yeah.
It's definitely, I feel like more and more like I'm like I need a lockbox or like I need to put my phone in the freezer, so to speak, and then like get some work done and then go retrieve it because it's
Yes.
so distracting.
Yes, it is.
Very distracting. So does writing energize you or make you tired?
If I make good progress, it energizes me. If it's a day where words just aren't flowing, then I kind of get bummed and I feel tired.
Do
um,
you push through that even when they're not like flowing?
I do my best. I usually, so the software that I use to write is called Dabble. And so you can set your total word count goal for your book, and then it'll split up that into daily goals.
Hmm.
And so, like, my goal for this fantasy book right now is 80,000 words. And so and it's by the end of the year. And so I have like 800 words or so that I'm supposed to write every day in order to meet that goal. And so I shoot for that goal, and at a bare minimum, I try to meet that. If I go over, that's great, but that's like
That's
that's
like
what
your
I
goal.
shoot for. It's what I strive for. Doesn't always happen. This last week, I didn't do any writing just because I think we started a new fussy phase with the baby, and it was like it's not happening, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, you definitely have to go with the flow of the little ones when they're definitely in charge for sure.
Yes.
So, do you struggle with writer's block ever?
I used to really struggle with it. And I think part of my problem was I thought that I had to write chronologically. And so I would find myself getting stuck because I didn't know what was going to happen next because I'm more of a pantser than a plotter. And so I just kind of write as I go. And so I would get stuck and get writer's block because I didn't know what was supposed to happen next. But two things that helped me with that was doing 10-minute writing sprints. Any longer than 10 minutes, and I got distracted. Any shorter than that, then it just didn't work. But the other thing was not writing chronologically. If I saw a scene later on in the book in my head, I would go ahead and write that. And more often than not, that would inspire me to go back and fill in what I missed.
Oh,
It would inspire a new scene that I didn't know was in there.
yeah.
So that kind of those are the two things that helped me get through writer's block, and now it's not quite as much of an issue now. Um,
Hmm.
I won't say I don't struggle some days because I do, but it's definitely a lot better.
Oh, that's great advice. Like to skip ahead because if I was writing, I'd be like, no, it has to be this one and this one and this one, and then
Yep.
I would probably spend months on one chapter because I'm like, I don't know how to get from there to there.
Yep.
So that's a good idea to just be just within the story always, but you don't have to be like in line in the story. So, if you could go back in time and get in a time machine and go back and meet your younger writing self, what is something or some sort of advice you would give yourself knowing what you know now?
Told myself not to give up so easily because I had originally started Scales of Ash and Smoke, my first fantasy book, way back in high school. One of the chapters in there was an assignment that I did for my creative writing class. And my teacher encouraged me to keep writing it because she's like, I could see this turning into a book and getting published someday. And like, I was like, sure, yeah, you're just telling me that because you're my teacher and you have to be nice. But I wish that I would have listened and not like listened to the doubts in my head because I didn't touch it for 8 years.
Wow.
And then it took me another 2 years after that to finish it. And like I could have done this so much sooner, and like I could
Hmm.
have had the story in the world for people to read so much sooner. But I just doubted myself and I gave up too easily. And if you're gonna write a book, you need to not give up easily because it's really hard and it takes more time than you want it to. And every aspect that goes into it, it just takes time and patience, which patience is very hard sometimes. But I think that would be the biggest thing is don't doubt myself so much and don't give up so easily.
So do you still have some contact with that teacher that you can send her now and say, or him and say, look, I finished it?
I tried to find her on Facebook, and I found her profile and I sent her a friend request like probably 4 years ago, and I don't think she's on there anymore. I don't think she checks it because she hadn't had any recent posts. She never accepted my friend request. So I
Oh.
have no way of contacting her, but I wish that I could tell her thank you.
What would be your, because you do fantasy writing, so I'm going to
Yeah.
have to ask you this because I ask all fantasy writers. If you could pick any mythical creature, fantasy character to be for yourself, what would it be and why?
I mean, I write dragons. I love dragons. I've always loved them. Growing up, Spyro was my favorite video game, and I always watched Dragon Tales after school. And I've always had a love for dragons. I would, I would be a dragon in a heartbeat if I could.
Yeah.
It'd
I mean,
be
who
so
wouldn't
cool.
want to fly and breathe
Right.
fire and like get rid of someone that's annoying you with the
Yes.
fire?
Yeah, the dragons in my fantasy book are actually inspired by Spyro and Dragon Tales, and so
Hmm.
they actually stand upright. They're not on all fours, and you don't ride them like in um, oh my gosh, Fourth Wing. There we go.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So and some of them are shapeshifters, so they shift between human and dragon. So
I'm so excited to read it.
it's a different twist on dragons, and so I wish I could like live in that type of dragon world.
Uh-huh. Well, I loved Dragon Tales as a kid. Like that was such a great show. That's so cool that you based it off of that.
Yeah.
I love that. So what is the most difficult thing for you in the writing process?
Editing. I I hate editing. I wish I liked it. I mean, it is very satisfying to take a really gross first draft and turn it into the finished polished product, but it just takes so long and you get so tired of reading it, and I wish I had more patience for it. But yeah, I, hmm. I a lot of people hate drafting and they love editing. I'm the opposite. I would rather just write all day long and never have to edit it.
How long does it take you usually to edit a story after you finished it?
It depends on the book. I have been getting faster just as I get more experience, and I try not to, but a lot of times I edit as I write, and so that kind of speeds up the process. Um, but I think I spent on Scales of Ash and Smoke. I spent probably over a year editing. But then for my most recent release, The Love Chase, I want to say I spent 4 months ish, somewhere around there, editing. And so you kind of, it's not like I was editing for 4 months straight because you do developmental edits and then you do your own editing and then you send it back for copy and line edits and then you do some more editing. So it's not
Hmm.
like I was editing every single day, but the whole process took about 4-ish months.
And then how long does it take you to finish a book? Obviously, your first book, you said it took you several years, but like now.
Well, pre baby, it would take me about 2 to 3 months to write a book, and that's with 6 books under my belt. The
Hmm.
It gets faster with each book, except this one because
Yeah,
yeah, baby. But yeah, 2 to 3 months is usually how quick I was able to write.
that's a pretty good turnover rate for sure. So what is on the other side? So your favorite part is the drafting, then I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you enjoy like more of the character development or more of like, well, depending obviously with rom-com, it's more of in our day and age, but with the world building.
Yeah. I so with the rom-coms, I love writing the dialogue and the witty banter and all of like the back and forth between the love interests. I just
Hmm.
think that's so much fun. Cuz I mean, you get to really put a lot of personality into that, whereas like the rest of it, it's in a contemporary setting. You can't really make up a ton, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Versus in a fantasy book, you can literally write whatever the heck you want. You get to build the world, you get to build the magic system, which I love doing the magic system um, in my fantasy books. It's just I I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep, I do too. I love when there's a lot of world building in fantasy because then I feel like I have you ever seen those Instagrammers that they do like this thing where like they're holding the book and then they like fall backwards and then they're like
Yeah.
magically somehow they make it look like the fantasy world they're reading. I was like
Yes.
that is what it does to me every single time where I just leave this world and I'm going into their
Yes.
fantasy world and I love that.
I've always wanted to do one of those reels,
I
but I live in
know.
the middle of nowhere and I don't own fantasy-esque clothes. It's like I
Yeah.
can't, so I'll just watch these people.
Yeah, I want to do it. I'm always trying to figure out how they do it because I'm like, they must be doing like a green screen behind them or something. Because I'm like, how do they get it to look so rich and detailed? Because I'm like,
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of editing in that, but I love it. I think it looks great.
Yes.
So what is the most difficult thing for you about writing the opposite sex?
Uh, Trying to think how a guy would think. That was like one of my biggest struggles with Scales of Ash and Smoke. Because originally I hadn't planned to do dual POV, but the more I wrote, the more I was like, I need the guy's point of view.
Hmm.
And as I started writing it, I felt like it just sounded like a girl, like a girl's inner dialogue. And I was like, this, like, it's got to sound like a guy if it's going to be a guy's point of view. And so I really struggled with trying to figure out how, because I'm not a guy, I don't know how they
Yeah.
think, trying to balance like how I would think with how I assume a guy would think. And I actually had my husband read chapters early on. And I was like,
Hmm.
is this how a guy would even think about this? Because I don't, like, I want to do him justice. I don't want it to
Yeah.
be a really feminine male character because he's supposed to be a strong male. And that's what I wanted him to be. And so that, I don't know if any other female writers feel that way about writing a male character, but it's hard to get in their head.
Yeah, I've heard. So I've talked to a few of them, and a lot of them, they're like, I'll interview my husband, or I'll interview my best friend or my brother. Like, I talked to one author, and her brother was in law enforcement, and her main character was in law enforcement. So she's like, I just interviewed him. I'm like, what would you do in this scenario? Like, what would you be thinking about? What would you be noticing? And so she like just totally like took all the stuff he said and then put it into the character. She's like, I
Yes.
have no idea how to portray this.
Yeah.
So did he help you with like changing the verbiage and the talking points like after he read it and was like,
Yeah.
no, do this, and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff?
He,
Yeah,
yes. It would not be what it is without his help for sure.
that's wonderful. He's a good sidekick partner
Yes.
for your writing for sure. That's good.
Yes.
So what is the hardest scene for you to write?
Honestly, I feel like the big scenes where it's like either a battle or like a love confession, like those tend to be easier for me because I
Hmm.
feel like I can see them so clearly in my mind. The hard ones for me are like all the in between scenes, like just the stuff that's like building up to the big ones, the stuff that, not that they don't matter, but it's not like anything huge is happening. Like the filler chapters, those are what I struggle with a lot.
Okay.
And I'm
So
still trying
so
to go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I'm still trying to figure out how to, because like I said, I'm a pantser, so I figure it out as I go. And so it's like I always see the big picture chapters, but it's those filler ones that I'm just like, can I just write big chapters?
Just get all the big ones out of the way. So then for you, like your favorite parts are like the big emotional confessions and like in
Yep.
fantasy, like the epic battles and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of research as far as like for the fantasy side, if you're doing like a battle scene, or are you just kind of just go with what comes to your imagination?
A lot of time I just kind of go with what comes to mind. I pay attention to fantasy books that I write that have battle scenes and kind of how those authors will go about writing it, which kind of helps me figure out how I want to or how I don't want to. Um,
Hmm.
and I might research like specific weapons just 'cause I don't know anything about weapons or like fighting stances or stuff like that. But for the most part, I just kind of write it or take inspiration from my favorite authors who have written those types of scenes.
That's wonderful. So when you get your inspiration for writing a, well, the fantasy book, you did that from an assignment, but like, do you know, like, do you first get the first meet cute, or do you get like the ending when it like comes to you in your mind and you're imagining it when you get that first inkling of a story?
Well, I know usually, at least with the rom-coms, I there have been like a specific thing that has inspired them, like the reel on Instagram inspired the heart shot. And then I remember I was in the shower and I was just thinking about, I think I was just thinking about Christmas and for the mistletoe bluff, and I had a snapshot in my mind of the car scene, which is, if anybody has read that book, they'll know what I'm talking about. But I just had snapshot in my mind of it, and I was like, I know the whole book now. Like it's the whole thing centered around it. So
Yeah.
I feel like the more books I get under my belt, the more like a specific thing will inspire the book, and everything will build off of that versus like just like I'm not great at coming up with ideas.
For the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't think of the word. Um, because like even with Scales of Ash and Smoke in my creative writing class, it was a writing prompt that got me to figure out what that book was going to be.
Mhm.
So I wish I could say that, oh, I just pulled it out of thin air, but it's usually something that inspires
Something
me,
that inspires you.
some type of inspiration. Yeah.
So, when you're doing your characters, do you do like a character development, character interview as you're
I've
going?
I've started to. So I don't know if you know who Abby Emmons is, but
I've
she has
heard of
a
her.
yeah, she has a writing YouTube channel. And so I watched a lot of her YouTube videos on character development, and she has it's kind of like an outline thing,
Hmm.
but not quite. It's basically a character development worksheet where you can go through and answer specific questions about their personality and like if they have an enneagram or what their greatest fear is, what their greatest desire is, kind of help you develop the character before you start so that you know where you're going with that character for the book.
Hmm.
And with my fantasy series, I hadn't done that, and I think I that's one area that I struggled with was character development. Thankfully, I had great editors that really helped me with that. But with my rom coms, I really tried to put a lot of time into the characters and make sure that, especially because it was a contemporary book, like
Hmm.
it's not like you have these epic obstacles in a fantasy book to make you grow. It's a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
Um, and so I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of growth and development. And so I tried to use that type of outline to help.
Yeah, you're I think the second person I've heard mention her, that they use that as a tool for their writing, that they watch her videos to help expand their characters or their scenes and different things like that. So, who inspired or what inspired your writing journey? Did you always want to be a writer?
It didn't always. When I took the creative writing class in high school, that was the first time where I was like, I actually like writing. Like, this is actually something I enjoy and I'm not bad at it. And so I mean, like I said, it took me a long time to finally pick it back up and to like believe in myself enough to want to. But it was actually when I read A Court of Thorns and Roses for the first time. I was like, this is amazing. And now I'm like, it really inspired me to write. Like even when I reread it, like it gets my juices going to write. Like something about that book, I don't know what it is. It just inspires me to write. And that was after I read that series for the first time. That's when I picked up my book and I finished it.
I feel like that book is like the 6 degrees of separation, like that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Do you know that? Have you heard that before? So I feel like that's totally. So I have a card business. I have an Etsy shop
Okay.
and I make 3D box cards, like greeting cards based off of books.
Okay.
And so I was contacted, well, this was not last March, but the like last year, March, from this girl. She says, my best friend's turning 30. She loves this series. Could you make a card based off this book? And I'm like, sure, I'll try it. And so she sends me it, and it's A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I'm like, I'm looking at it, I'm looking at character art. I'm like, I have to read this book because I'm not going to be able to do this book justice if I haven't even read this story.
Yeah.
So I got the book and I read it, and then I immediately, like within the month, read all of the other books like in a row. And then shortly thereafter that, I started my Bookish Instagram account, which then in turn led me to people like you and this community. So it's just so funny because I've heard several people talk about that book and they're like, "Oh, I loved this book and that started my process." And it's just so funny because it's like seriously like the 6 degrees of separating all of us is that book.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
So, but yeah, so I went down the wormhole with that book, and I'm so glad because I got to meet and find so many amazing authors because I was in like a bad reading slump being a mom and just working and homeschooling. And I was like, I just never took any time for myself really. It was just always about everybody else. And so that really kind of got me reading because the last time I had read books was like Harry Potter or Twilight like a long time ago, and then I just stopped. And so it like re-kickstarted my love of books. And now I found so many amazing authors and so many amazing books and this like great community that supports each other. And I love supporting indie authors because you guys have to wear so many hats just to put your book out into the world. Because it's like you're not just you're the writer, the designer, the publisher, the marketing team. Like it's just all of it together.
Yeah.
So it's definitely it's a very um, more in detailed type of job and art than I originally thought it was. And so I have a deeper respect for it now.
Yes.
So
But I don't think people realize just how much goes into this. Even my
yeah,
husband, when I was going through the process with the first book, he's like, "You have to do what? You have to do what? How much you got to pay for that?" Yeah, it's a lot. It's
yeah.
not for the faint of heart, that is for sure.
And it's definitely when you're an indie author, there's no one else helping you. That's the difference between traditional and indie is like you're doing it all yourself. You don't have some big company paying for your book. You're doing it all out of pocket.
Yep.
And so it's something that you're very passionate about and uh, it comes out. You can see it when people talk about their books. I feel like, I mean, I know I know traditional authors, they are passionate about their book, but it's on a whole other level, I feel like, for indie authors because they have so much invested
Yeah.
in it, for sure.
Yes.
So out of all of your books, who is your favorite book boyfriend?
That's a hard question. uh, so Taryn in my fantasy series will probably always be my first love because I love him. But Jameson in the Heart Shot is he's my golden boy. I love him.
Oh, he's so
He's one of
great.
my favorite characters I've ever written.
Yes, I love him. He's like, oh, that book. Seriously, it lives rent free in my brain. It's
Yeah.
always there on repeat. I love that book. I love his character so much. I love just the back and forth between the two of them and all of the trials and tribulations they went through during that book and the sweet moments and then like the completely normal like moments like on the sofa and she's like so mortified and he's like whatever. Like all
Yep.
of those, it's just like a realistic story of two people. It's not like fluffed up. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yep.
Like you could totally picture yourself being that character in that
Yep.
book because it's just
100%.
really real.
Yep.
So,
And that's what I was going for. I wanted it to feel like you could easily put yourself in the story and be her and
yeah.
experience all of these things. Like I love Hallmark movies, but they're not very realistic. Like they just that kind of stuff just doesn't happen in real life. So I wanted like the Hallmark vibes, but
Hmm.
realistic
Yeah.
and with a little bit more depth, maybe.
Yeah. Those are my guilty pleasures. I'll like watch those when I'm like, I just need a day to just not live in the real
Yes.
world and I'm going to watch this. And I get that vibe from that book. It was total Hallmark vibes, but then like so much richer. So it was a very, very, very good book. So out of all of your characters, which one is the most like you and why?
There are really big pieces of me in all three of my rom com main characters. Elsie's insecurity. I'm probably the most like Elsie just because like writing that book was very healing for me because I put so much of me and my own past into that book. But then in Mistletoe Bluff, Maya, like her anxiety issues, very much so mine. And then in the love chase, there's another big piece. I don't want to give it away, so I'm not going to say anything about that one, but
There's a
um
section of you in there.
yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, Elsie is definitely the most, but there are big pieces of me in all three of them.
Yeah. Did you find it cathartic, like you were saying, with all the books, like writing that and putting it like out and voicing it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you don't realize like the wisdom that you already have in your head until you write it. Like
Yeah.
there were some quotes that I put in those books that like they were just like kind of mic drop moments that I had never even thought about until I wrote them. And then I was like, wait, this actually helps me. And I wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I never realized that that was inside of me.
You're like
So
outside of your body and you're writing it, and then you're like, wait a minute. Like it's like that perspective or perception shift,
yes.
so to speak. Yeah. I love that when I have that in a book. Like it must be so profound as the writer doing that, but like I love when I read it that I'm just like, huh,
Yeah.
that makes me think differently. Like I love those moments in
Me
stories.
too.
Those are make the great stories. So what are some of your favorite tropes?
Enemies to lovers. It is so. Scales of Ashes Smoke was enemies to lovers. Mistletoe Bluff was enemies to lovers, and then this new fantasy book I'm writing is also enemies to lovers. And I love it
I
so
love
much.
that trope. I'm right there with you. It's the
And
best.
it, oh, and I've also done a "That's My Wife" trope, which gets me every time. I
Ooh,
love
that's a
it.
good one.
And then like, who did this to you? Like those are my three. I'm just like I will melt every time.
Yes, I'm a puddle on the floor with those tropes. Those are some of my favorite. I also like, and I know everybody hates it. I like surprise pregnancies.
Okay.
I think that because I think once that happens, like it sets up such uh banter. Like not necessarily most of the time it's in a good way. Sometimes the author makes it like them take it really badly and then they like grow that way. But usually it sets up such banter between the characters or them and their friends, like what? And so
Yeah.
I love reading that. I love banter no matter what. Like any book with banter, and that's my jam. Like
Yes.
I love that about books. It's just the ones you can giggle and you're just like want to stick
Yeah.
your head in the pillow
Yeah.
and just laugh.
Yeah.
I love that. So, what is your favorite type of character to write?
I really like the sassy, sarcastic side characters. If you ever read my fantasy series, halfway through the second book, there's a dragon, and he's probably my favorite character I've ever written
Hmm.
because he's just so sassy. He was so much fun to write. Any like non-main character where I can just have fun and be sarcastic and punny and like all of the sassiness. Those are my favorite.
I love the sassy sidekick characters. They're so good. They're
Yes.
so funny. They bring such depth to a story.
Yes.
So, for you, do you find that a certain time of day works best for writing? Is it like early in the morning, late at night, or is it just whenever you can fit it in?
Well, pre-baby, I found that my best writing time was like early afternoon. So like from 1 to 4 ish was like my golden time. In the morning, I would focus more on like marketing stuff.
Hmm.
But now having a baby mornings when I still have a little bit of energy, it seems to be the best time for me to write, but it's also when she takes the shortest naps, so it's harder to write.
Yeah.
Because by the time evening comes, I'm just kind of done. I'm so
Yeah.
tired, but I write in small pieces now when I can. If she's napping a little bit longer than normal, then I will sit down and try and get some words down. But it's
Yeah.
definitely
Definitely
more of a
hard to
challenge.
balance with the
Yes,
little one.
yes.
They take a lot of time. Um, so sorry, I'm looking. I have my notes on this side.
Oh, you're
Like
fine.
I'm like, let me look over here and make sure I'm staying on track. So, do you, when you're doing your covers, do you, working with the artists, do you enjoy that process or does it kind of stress you out?
It's my favorite. Sorry,
No,
I just
you're
took a
fine.
drink and it's like coming out. It is my favorite part of the whole process. Like I get so impatient. I just want to do the cover design process. For my fantasy books, I used a company called Demonza. I think they're in New Zealand.
Hmm.
They're really cool because instead of like having to book months and months and months out, you just send them all your info, and within 2 weeks, you get like 2 or 3 drafts to choose from, and then you can make changes. And so I used them, and I absolutely adore my fantasy covers. Like it brought the whole thing to life for me.
Hmm.
And then being able to work with Ink and Laurel for my rom coms was so fun. She does magic, like
So
absolute magic.
cute.
I don't know how she does it, but
They're so
even when
cute.
I like even with the love chase, like I was like, I really have no creative direction for this. I don't know what I want. All I know is I want a tornado on the cover. Like that's my only request. And I thought she would say no because like a tornado is kind of hard to draw,
Right
but
there.
she did it and it's amazing and I absolutely love it. And I wish that I wish I knew the titles of my books before I finished writing them so that I could do the cover up front because
Hmm.
then I feel like that would inspire me to finish. Like right now with my fantasy book, I wish I knew what the title was going to be so I could just start the cover design process so that I can
Have it to
have
reference.
yes. Because like it's hard when when you can't see the finish line. It's
Yeah.
hard to keep going sometimes versus if you have that finish line in front of you, it's like, okay, we're working towards something here. It's not just
Yeah.
endless words every day.
So how do you go about naming the book? Like what's the process when you're finished? Like that you go, oh, this is the name.
The title of the book is usually where I struggle. Scales of Ash and Smoke, actually, one of my beta readers suggested it, and I was like, "That's it! Like that's the name." Because I originally, I think I had called it way back in the day. It was called The Lone Dragon, which isn't as catchy.
Yeah.
I can't remember what my working title was after that, but the Heartshot title kind of came to me as I was writing. I was like, that's kind of catchy. Like when Maya was calling it the Heartshot, I was like, I think that's the title. I think that's it. And Mistletoe Bluff was a lot harder because I knew I wanted it to be something Christmas related, but I was like, I I, mm, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
And the
Well, it's a
Love
great
Chase.
title.
Thank you. The Love Chase, I actually did like an Instagram story like question, like give me suggestions because I have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And several people suggested The Love Chase, and I was like, I think I can get on board with that one. It fits the book pretty well. So
That's awesome.
the
I'm
title's always a
excited to read
challenge.
it. Um, I love the cover. I
Thank
love
you.
the cover. It's so cute. I love the cover. I love the other one, so I'm like, I want to read these. These are gonna be my TBR for October.
Yeah.
Um, so what, in your opinion, makes a great story?
I mean, other than romance, if it has romance, you've got me. But I love having those real moments, like you mentioned that the heart shot has, like where you can just put yourself into the book and like you can feel what they're feeling. You can like see yourself experiencing what they're experiencing. One thing that my creative writing teacher actually taught me was when you're writing, write with all five senses. So, and that's something that I I really I feel like I really did it with my fantasy series and I've kind of fallen off of it for the rom-coms and I'm trying to get back to it.
Hmm.
But it's like you go through all of the senses in each chapter and you add them in so that like you're very immersed in whatever the world is that you're reading. Um, and I always feel like authors that do that, it really just ramps up the book, in my opinion, because you can really put yourself into the story. And it's not just like you're reading that this happened and this happened and this happened. Like you can smell what they smell, you can see what they see, you can taste what they taste, that kind of thing, if that makes
It's
sense.
the show versus tell, I feel
Yep.
like immersive show versus tell.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. Like I said, I love when a book can make me feel like I've left my world and I've gone into their world and I'm not
Hmm.
not in our world anymore. I need a break from our world. So I love
Yes.
that. So what is the most surprising thing you've learned on your writing journey?
Um, it's okay to be bad. It's okay to be bad at it, especially with like the first draft because I'm a perfectionist. I'm an overachiever. Like I I want I've always wanted my first draft to be better than it ends up being, and I want it to be. I mean, wouldn't we all want it to
Yeah.
be perfect the first
Yeah.
time? Um, and so like I've really had to just accept yeah, I wrote this chapter and it's absolute garbage, but that's okay because I'm going to edit it and it's going to get better. It's
Yeah.
okay to be bad. And I mean, sometimes you have to be bad because if it's not bad, then where does it grow?
Yes, exactly. So what are some things that you use as a writer, as like tools that you use to make your writing craft better? I know you mentioned the YouTube
Mhm.
videos, but is there any other things that you use that you help to fine tune your writing?
Honestly, I just read a lot. I take a lot of inspiration from other authors and I pay attention to how they write, and the things that I like about their writing and the things that I don't care for as much. And I learn so much. Because I've tried reading writing craft books. I have some right there, but I feel like I learn more by experiencing it
Hmm.
versus reading about it. Like one of my writer friends, she does an outline, but she goes by like the save the cat steps. I
Hmm.
don't even know what they are. But I was telling her about a spot that I was stuck in one of my books, and she's like, "Oh, you're at this plot point thing," and I'm like, "Sure." And then she was explaining it to me, and I was like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." But like, it doesn't work for me to like write. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Using,
Like,
yeah,
I'm
like
not.
using that as like a template.
Yeah,
It doesn't flow right for your writing.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people talk about that book, that they use it as like a rough skeleton outline, and then some of them are like, I'll write the book and then I'll go back through and check that I hit everything, but I don't use it during my writing process. So I've heard it kind of both ways with that one. That one's come up a lot. I've heard a lot of people talk about that book.
Yeah.
Um, so do you use uh personalities from like the people around you in your writing, or are they just totally made up situations, characters, everything's just totally fictional?
Most of the time, it's all made up. Ben in the Heart Shot was inspired by one of my exes. So he was terrible. But other than that, I mostly make them up. I feel like I don't like I'm careful about who I would write into my books because like I
Hmm.
don't want to offend anybody or like I
Yeah,
don't want to make anybody feel left out if I wrote them in. So for the most part, I just make them up. I might pull little personality traits from people around
hmm,
me, but mostly
yeah,
make them up.
yeah. I definitely did not like Ben.
You're not supposed to.
What's your favorite part about being a writer?
Favorite part? I mean, just getting to write what's in my head and put it on paper and like people actually want to read it. Like it still feels surreal to me, even 6 books in. Like getting to be able to make up a story in my head and put it on paper and then people read it and they love it as much as I do. Like that's just and they I one of my favorite things is like getting messages from readers about how they were going through such a hard time and like this book gave them hope, to keep going and to keep fighting and or like they have had really bad experiences with love and like my books helped them to believe in love again, like those kinds of things. It just it means the world to me and like it really motivates me to keep writing. All I want to do with my writing is like make a difference. I want people to read it and feel hopeful or to believe in love again or whatever it might be. I want to make an impact and like my writing is the one way I can do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I love that about books when you can relate to it and then have that pull. So, what was your first romantic read that you read? Like that you were like, oh, I like this genre. I want to read it. Like, was there a book that really spoke to you?
I'm trying to remember. Oh, have you heard of Sarah Adams?
I think possibly. I'd have to see the names of the book. I'm better with the names of the books than the
Yeah.
authors a lot of the time.
She I don't remember what her very first. She started indie and then she got a trad pub deal.
Uh-huh.
Um, I don't remember what her first one was, but the first one that I read was the Off Limits Rule. That was my first. I think that was my first rom com ever, and I absolutely died. Like I loved it so much. If you like The Heart Shot, you would probably like her books.
Okay.
especially her earlier ones, because I feel like our writing styles are pretty similar. But I just absolutely adored that book, and I quickly read all of her books, and then I kept reading rom coms after that. But
Yeah. Oh, I'll have to check her out.
yeah,
So when you are finished with a book and you publish it, do you read the reviews or do you avoid them?
now I avoid them. When I first started, I was reading them, and I found I so I don't know if you know anything about love languages or anything like that, but words of affirmation is mine. And so negative words really impact me a lot. And so I found out very quickly that I can't handle reading negative reviews of my book. So I have stopped reading my reviews. What I do is one of my friends will kind of screen them for me.
Hmm.
If there's any like constructive criticism that a lot of people are mentioning, then she'll share that with me in a nice way that's not trashing my book. And I'll take that into consideration for my next book. Or she'll send me screenshots of like glowing reviews where people loved it. So I still get to read some of them, but like especially I stay off Goodreads because it's it's a scary place.
That's so funny that you brought up the love languages because that was my next question. I was going to ask you, what's your love language? And then how do you show love being a romance writer? Like, because you're writing about that all the time. So,
Yeah, I feel like I tend to like writing loving, sappy, like love confession stuff. Like I feel like I'm good at that because like words are my thing.
hmm.
But I'm not good at any of the other love languages, so I feel like that's where it comes in.
So when you're showing love, you do more of the words of affirmation to the other person also. So you give and receive that both same way.
Yep.
Yeah. I love the love languages. That brought so much like light to people. Like
Yes,
it's really true. Like if you don't know yours, definitely take the quiz because it brings like a whole new light to how you think about things.
for sure.
Um, so did you have a favorite book as a child that you
So
like?
the first, I think it was probably the first fantasy book that I read called, I think it's called Raising Dragons.
Hmm.
Um, I read it in seventh grade. That was when I really started getting into reading. Um, and that was my first experience with a dragon book. And that also has dragon shapeshifters, which again kind of inspired mine too. But that I used to before that I always thought that reading was really dumb. I hated it so much. But then I think I got that book for Christmas and I read it and I was like, there's dragons in books? There's magic in books? This is amazing. What? Can I read more of this?
You were just reading the wrong books before.
Right. Yeah.
No, I love that. I love asking that question because there's even books that I've never heard of that
Mhm.
or people are talking about, and I was like, oh, I want to read those. I want to get those and read them to my kids. I love getting old books that like aren't really around anymore and
Yeah.
that are little treasures. So
Yes.
I love that. So what is a quirky or unique fact about you that maybe most people don't know?
I'm just a quirky person in general. I can't pinpoint anything. I'm really socially awkward. And I'm really bad at small talk. So a lot of times when I'm out talking to people, like I
Out in
just
the
kind of,
real world and in
yep,
communicating.
yep. I just kind of smile and nod. I
I'm the
have like a
same
hard
way. I've gotten better though, since I've been doing these interviews. I've
time.
actually gotten a little bit better with like, I mean, maybe that's just my opinion. I could be totally awkward still, but I feel like I'm not as awkward
I don't think you're awkward.
as I used to be. Because I used to be like, okay, then I want to go over there. So,
Yes, I feel you. I used to be an assistant manager at a retail store, and I feel
mhm.
like that like forced me to get out of my box and like to get better at small talk. But ever since I quit, it's like I lost all ability
Yeah.
to
I used to be in
converse.
retail too. It's like a whole other, it's like a jungle in retail. And then when you leave it and you're like back in the normal world, it's like, and then it goes away fast and you're like, I don't remember that at all. It's like you block it out because it's traumatizing.
Yeah.
So, your plans for your future books, the next one that's going to be coming out, do you have a date on it yet or?
I'm hopeful to have it out before next June. There's a author convention, book convention thing here in Minneapolis. Um, I think it's Midwest Bookish Fest. I think that's
Mhm.
what the title is. And so I'll be at that. So I'm really, really hoping to have it out in time for that. We'll see.
Oh, my
I
fingers
can't,
crossed for you.
yeah, I can't make any promises, but that is my goal right now to have it out by then.
Yeah, make like a big sign above your desk with like stars and like have that as the target.
Yeah.
Yeah, planning for that. So, my last question is, what message would you want readers to take away after reading your book?
I mean, like I said earlier, I try to, in all of my books, write in like an underlying message of hope. Like, no matter how dark things seem or hopeless things seem or how alone a character might feel, like there's always hope. And I always hope that readers, once they get to the end of the book, that they will feel that hope and that they'll, be in a better mood, feel uplifted, feel encouraged, and like ready to face whatever's going on. I always hope that people leave my books better than how they started it.
I love that. That's a great message to have, and it's definitely one we need in this world.
Yes.
There needs to be a lot more hope, that's for sure. Well, thank
Definitely.
you so much for joining me today. And I will put all the information on where you can get her books, where you can find her on social media and her website. Be sure to share this with your bookish bestie and make sure to like and subscribe so you can see what's coming next from other authors as we get more looks behind the books. And thank you so, so much. I wish you tons of success in the future, and I will be along for the ride.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye.